the town of Dry Creek, girls weren't raised, they were priced. At just 14, Marilu Tucker was worth one failed harvest and a stack of worn-out bills. Her father sold her like a sack of grain to a man whose soul was as crooked as the buildings lining the town's only dirt road. A man of God. But nobody counted on the outlaw, the one who rode into town with ghosts in his eyes and a storm gathering at his back. He wasn't looking to save anyone. He was looking for revenge. What he found was her, and that changed everything. This is the kind of story they don't tell in history books, the kind that gets whispered by the fire, passed down like a loaded gun. Dry Creek was a blister on the face of the territory. The wind never stopped howling, scraping the paint off the chapel and carrying the taste of dust and regret. People here kept their words locked up tight behind their teeth. Silence wasn't golden. It was survival. Marilu knew silence better than she knew her own mother's face. Mama died in the drought that birthed her, leaving nothing behind but a cough that settled deep in her daddy's chest and never left. He raised Marilu like a stray dog, fed her, kept her out of the rain, but never looked her in the eye. By 14, she could shoot a rifle, haul water for 2 miles, and read the good book, though she'd found very little good in it. Then the bank came. Then the harvest failed again. They lost the mule, then the rifle, then the roof over their heads. Her daddy had one thing left to sell, one thing Pastor Edward Finch had been watching with cold, hungry eyes from his pulpit every Sunday. Her. The deal was done behind the church, near the well that had been dry for a decade. Pastor Finch spoke of the Lord's work, of giving the girl a proper home, of salvation. His words were smooth and polished, but his eyes were like chips of river ice. He handed her father a thin stack of bills, and the men shook hands. A done deal. Marilu watched from the church steps. She didn't cry. Tears were a waste of water in a town this thirsty. Her father didn't say goodbye. He just lit a cigarette, coughed that deep, rattling cough, and turned his back. He never looked at her again. The wagon ride to the parsonage was dead quiet. Finch didn't speak to her, but his presence was a physical thing, heavy and suffocating, like a wool blanket in the summer heat. His house was a tall, narrow box with boarded-up windows, crouched behind the chapel like a predator. The door groaned when he opened it, a sound like a man taking his last breath. Inside, the walls were covered in crosses, but the air felt anything but holy. Finch finally turned to her, his shadow swallowing her whole. "You'll sleep in the pantry," he said, his voice flat and hard. He tossed a burlap sack at her feet. "And you'll keep your mouth shut, understood?" Marilu nodded. She was an expert at keeping her mouth shut. That first night, she curled up on the hard floor, sandwiched between sacks of dried beans and jars of pickled beets. Through the cracks in the pantry door, she could see Finch's shadow pacing back and forth, his voice a low rumble as he quoted scripture to the empty room. He was performing for the neighbors, a good, holy man. But in the dark, where no one could see, the devil was just getting started. The next morning, the work began, scrubbing floors until her knuckles were raw. Finch watched her from the pews, his Bible open, his voice sharp as he recited verses about the sins of women. By the third day, a routine had set in. Keep your head down. Keep your hands busy. Keep your spirit locked away where he couldn't find it. But even in the deepest dark, a single spark can catch. Marilu started writing. Tiny notes scribbled in pencil on scraps of paper torn from a feed sack. "Help me. He hurts me. The pastor is a liar." She tucked them inside the church hymnals, between the pages of Amazing Grace and Nearer, My God, to Thee. A desperate prayer sent out into the silent town. She didn't know if anyone would ever find them. She didn't know if anyone would care. But someone was watching. From the balcony of the Silver Coin Saloon across the street, a man leaned against a splintered post. His hat was pulled low, his duster was the color of the road, and a cigarette burned forgotten between his fingers. He watched the girl every morning. He saw the slight limp she tried to hide. He saw the bruises that peeked out from the collar of her dress. He saw everything the town pretended not to. His name was Jedediah Kane, and he hadn't come to Dry Creek to save a girl. He'd come to bury a man. But plans have a way of changing, and Jedediah's were about to get shot all to hell. Jedediah Kane didn't like towns. Towns had rules and walls and too many damn people with questions in their eyes. He was a man made for the open, for the wind and the horizon. But something about Dry Creek had its hooks in him. It was the girl. She wasn't just a girl. She was a ghost he'd seen before, in a dozen dusty towns from Kansas to New Mexico. The same hollow eyes, the same quiet suffering that good people learn to look right through. He didn't know her name. He didn't have to. He knew her story. Jed was in Dry Creek for one reason, and it was folded up in his coat pocket. A wanted poster for a man named Marshall Elias Blackwood, a lawman who'd sold his own men out for a bag of silver, leaving Jed's partners to die in a canyon ambush. Jed was the only one who'd walked out. He'd been hunting Blackwood ever since. The trail had led him here, to this dried-up husk of a town. Intelligence said Blackwood had a contact here, a man who laundered his dirty money through the church collection plate, a man named Finch. Jed had been watching the preacher for a week, waiting for a sign, for a slip-up. Then he saw the girl, and the fire for revenge started to burn with a different kind of heat. He saw the way she flinched when the church bell rang. He saw the way Finch would grab her arm, his fingers digging in, a sick smile on his face. One night he watched Finch drag her from the chapel back to the house. She didn't fight. She just went limp, like a doll whose strings had been cut. Jed's hand went to the Colt at his hip. It was an old instinct, the kind that gets you killed or gets you paid. That night he sat in his corner of the saloon, long after the card players had gone home. He took out a small, worn piece of cloth from an envelope, a scrap from a blue dress. His sister's. Ella. She'd been 15 when their pa sold her off to a good man in Amarillo. Jed had been 17, and a fool. He'd promised to come for her. By the time he got there, all he found was a cheap wooden cross over a mound of dirt. He hadn't been fast enough to save Ella. He took a long pull of rye whiskey, the fire in his gut now a raging inferno. He wasn't going to be too late this time. The next morning, he waited. He saw her walk to the chapel, her steps slow and deliberate. After she went inside, he followed. The church was empty, smelling of lemon oil and fear. He walked the pews, flipping through the hymnals. It didn't take long. Tucked into Psalm 23 was a folded scrap. He hurts me. Jed pocketed the note and left. He didn't go back to the saloon. He waited for her outside, leaning against the hitching post. When she came out, he stepped into her path. She froze, her eyes wide with terror. He held out his hand, not with the note, with a wild desert flower he'd picked from beside the road. It was small and purple and impossibly alive in this dead place. "You dropped this," he said, his voice a low gravel. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. "I see you." Her small, trembling fingers brushed against his as she took the flower. Their eyes met, and for a split second the fear in hers was replaced by something else. A flicker of hope, a question. Then the parsonage door opened, and Pastor Finch stood there, his face a mask of thunder. "Marilou, get inside, now!" She flinched and scurried away, the little flower clutched in her hand. Jed tipped his hat to the pastor. A silent promise, a declaration of war. He turned and walked away, But his mission had changed. Blackwood could wait. There was a devil in Dry Creek that needed killing first. But then Jed remembered the intelligence. Finch wasn't just a monster. He was a link in a chain. Killing him would be easy. Too easy. It would break the trail to Blackwood. He needed to get the girl out, and he needed to find out what Finch knew. That's when he realized this wasn't just a rescue, it was a heist. And the prize was something far more valuable than revenge. It was justice. The parsonage was a cage made of piety and floorboards that creaked with every secret. Pastor Finch had rules, and Marilou learned them the way a mouse learns the shape of a trap. Rule 1, speak only when spoken to. Rule 2, God's house is a reflection of your soul. Keep it spotless. Rule 3, sin requires correction. The correction was delivered with a thick leather belt that hung by the front door. Finch called it the Lord's hand. He would perform the beatings in the parlor, forcing her to kneel on the hardwood floor while he quoted verses about obedience. Afterward, he would pray over her bruises, his breath sour with rye whiskey, asking God to forgive her wicked heart. Marilou stopped crying. Crying was a sin. It was noise. It was defiance. She learned to go somewhere else in her mind, a quiet place where the belt couldn't reach. A prairie where she was running, wild and free, with the wind in her hair. Her only sanctuary was the pantry, a dark, coffin-sized space she had made her own. She had her mother's ribbon, a book of psalms, and the stories she told herself in the dark. Stories where she wasn't a captive, but a warrior. Then came the man with the gravelly voice and the desert flower. He had cracked open her cage of silence. Someone knew. Someone saw. That knowledge was both a comfort and a terror. Being seen was dangerous. That night Finch was in a rage. "I saw you," he hissed, his face inches from hers. "Talking to that filth from the saloon, that sinner." Marilou kept her eyes on the floor she was scrubbing, a spot only he could see. "He spoke to me, sir. I did not speak back." "You looked at him." Finch's hand cracked across her face. The sting was sharp, electric. "You invited the serpent into the garden with your wanton eyes. His kind brings nothing but rot and ruin." He grabbed her by the hair, dragging her to her feet. "You will not look at him again. You will not speak to him. If he touches you, I will burn the sin from your flesh myself. Do you understand me?" "Yes, sir," she whispered, the taste of blood in her mouth. He threw her into the pantry, the bolt sliding shut with a sound of finality. In the darkness, Marilou touched her split lip. The pain was real, but so was the memory of the man's eyes. They weren't kind, they were hard, but they had seen her. She couldn't write a note. Finch had torn up her paper and burned her pencil, so she used the only thing she had left. With a small sharp stone she'd found in the yard, she began scratching into the back of a loose floorboard in the pantry. She didn't draw a girl behind bars. She drew a map, a crude drawing of the parsonage, the chapel, and the saloon. She marked the pantry with an X. Then she drew a line from the pantry to a loose stone in the church's foundation, a place where she sometimes hid her mother's ribbon. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble. But it was all she had. If he was really watching, if he really understood, maybe he would find it. Because in this house of God, prayers went unanswered. But maybe, just maybe, a map could lead to a miracle. Jedediah saw the slap. He was across the street, a shadow in the alleyway, and he saw the whole thing through the parsonage window. The pastor's rage, the girl's small frame recoiling from the blow, the way Finch threw her into the pantry like a sack of garbage. Jed's knuckles were white where he gripped the cold brick of the saloon wall. The urge to draw his gun, to end it right there, was a physical clawing in his gut. But he held back. Killing Finch now would be a mercy the man didn't deserve. and it wouldn't get him any closer to Blackwood. Patience. He'd learned it the hard way, waiting out ambushes, tracking men for weeks across endless plains. Patience was a weapon. He waited until the lights in the parsonage went out. He waited until the moon was high and the town was dead asleep. Then he moved. He slipped across the street, silent as a sigh. He didn't go to the front door. He went around back to the chapel. The lock on the sacristy window was old and cheap. A little pressure from his knife and it gave way. He was inside. The air was thick with the smell of old incense and something else, something rotten. He didn't need a light. His eyes had long ago adjusted to the dark. He moved through the pews, his hand brushing against the hymnals where he'd found her first note. He went straight to the pantry door, which was attached to the back of the chapel kitchen. It was bolted from the outside. He put his mouth close to the wood. "Girl," he whispered, his voice barely a breath. "You in there?" Silence. "I saw what he did. I'm getting you out." A faint scratching sound from inside. He pressed his ear to the door. It was faint, but it was there. A desperate, rhythmic sound. He drew his knife. He couldn't break the bolt without making a racket. He had to find another way. He remembered her looking toward the church foundation earlier. It was a hunch, a wild guess based on a half-second glance. But sometimes a half-second was all you got. He slipped back outside and circled the chapel. By the faint moonlight, he ran his hands along the stone foundation. One stone was loose. He worked his fingers into the crack, pulled, and it came free. Inside the small cavity was a bundle of cloth. He unwrapped it. It wasn't a ribbon. It was a key, old and rusted. And wrapped around it was another scrap of paper. This one had only one word: basement. A new wave of cold washed over Jed. The basement wasn't for storing wine. He knew Finch's type. He knew what they did in the dark places where no one looked. He raced back to the sacristy, found the door that led down, and used the key. The lock turned with a rusty groan. The smell hit him first: damp earth, mold, and the metallic tang of old blood. He lit a match. The basement was a cell. A single iron ring was bolted to the far wall, a small, filthy pallet of straw on the floor. In the corner was a small wooden chest. He kicked it open. It wasn't gold. It wasn't guns. It was filled with cheap tin lockets. Dozens of them. He opened one. Inside wasn't a picture, but a tiny lock of blonde hair and a name scratched into the metal. Sarah. He opened another. Brown hair. Maria. Another. Red hair. Abigail. It was a collection. Trophies. The rage that had been simmering in Jed for a week, for years, finally boiled over. This wasn't just about Blackwood anymore. This was about every Sarah, Maria, and Abigail. It was about Ella, and it was about the girl locked in the pantry. He took a deep breath, forcing the rage down, turning it into cold, hard steel. He had what he needed, the proof. Finch wasn't just a brute. He was a serial predator, a monster hiding behind a cross, and Blackwood was protecting him. He went back upstairs. He walked to the front of the chapel, to the altar. He grabbed a bottle of communion wine and a candelabra. He wasn't just going to rescue her. He was going to purify this place with fire. He walked to the pantry door and spoke, his voice low and steady. "Stay low to the floor. When you hear the bell toll 3 times, I'm breaking this door down. Be ready to run." He didn't wait for an answer. He walked to the bell tower rope, a whiskey-soaked rag in his hand. It was time for the sermon to begin. The first toll of the church bell was a shock wave that ripped through the sleeping town. A second followed, then a third. It wasn't the gentle Sunday summons. It was a frantic, desperate alarm. Inside the parsonage, Pastor Finch shot out of bed, his mind thick with whiskey and confusion. He stumbled to the window and saw it. Flames. The chapel was on fire, licking at the night sky like a dragon's tongue. He screamed, a raw animal sound, and scrambled for his clothes. My church! My church! He never once thought about the girl locked in the pantry. Jedediah didn't wait for the fire to grow. After the third bell toll, he kicked the pantry door. The old wood splintered, the bolt ripping free. Marilou was already there, low to the ground, a small bundle clutched in her hands. Her eyes were huge in the flickering firelight, not with fear, but with a terrifying calm. "The basement," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Did you see?" "I saw," Jed said grimly. He grabbed her arm. "Time to go. Stick close." They slipped out the back as Finch burst out the front, screaming for help, for buckets, for God. Doors opened all over Dry Creek. Men ran into the street, shouting, their faces lit by the growing blaze. The fire was the perfect cover. A baptism for a town that had let a devil preach from its pulpit. In the chaos, no one saw the outlaw, and the girl melt into the shadows of the livery stable. Jed had their horses saddled and ready. A black stallion for him, a tough little mule for her. "Can you ride?" he asked. She just nodded, swinging herself up onto the mule with a grit he hadn't expected. They rode out of Dry Creek not with a bang, but with the crackle of burning timber and the frantic ringing of a single bell. They didn't look back. There was nothing there to see but ash and lies. By morning, the chapel was a smoldering ruin. The townsfolk stood around it in stunned silence. They found Pastor Finch weeping in the ashes, his face blackened with soot, his mind shattered. But that wasn't the biggest twist. When the sheriff went into the burned-out parsonage to investigate, he found the pantry door kicked in. The girl was gone. But that wasn't all. In the center of the pantry floor, Marilou had left something behind. It was the small, withered desert flower Jed had given her. And under it, scratched into the floorboards, was the map she had made. But she had added something new. Next to the drawing of the chapel basement, she had written a list of names. Sarah, Maria, Abigail. And at the bottom, she had added one more. Ella. The sheriff stared at the name, a cold dread seeping into his bones. He knew that name. A few years back, a young girl had passed through town, running from something. She'd asked for help. The sheriff had turned her over to Pastor Finch for safekeeping. He'd told himself he was doing the right thing. The girl's name was Ella Kane. The fire hadn't just been a rescue, it was a reckoning. Jedediah Kane hadn't just stolen a girl from Dry Creek. He had uncovered its sins, leaving them exposed for the whole world to see. And now the sheriff knew. Kane wasn't just running from the law, he was the law. And he would be coming back. The desert was a harsh and lonely God. It offered no comfort, no shade, only endless horizons of sand and rock. For Marilou, it was the most beautiful place she had ever seen. For the first 3 days, they barely spoke. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was filled with the things they didn't have to say. He rode ahead, a dark silhouette against the bleeding sunrises, and she followed, the rhythm of the mule's steps, a steady beat, carrying her further and further from the girl she used to be. Her wrists were still bruised. The ghost of Finch's hand still lingered on her skin. But with every mile, the memory faded, burned away by the relentless sun. They made camp at night in the shelter of rock overhangs, their fire a small, defiant star in the vast darkness. He taught her how to find water, how to read the stars, how to sleep with one ear open for the sound of rattlesnakes or riders. He never touched her. He never offered words of comfort. He treated her not as a child or a victim, but as a survivor, and that was a greater kindness than any she had ever known. One night, as he cleaned his pistol by the firelight, she finally found her voice. That name, Ella, on the floor. Was she your sister? Jed's hands stilled. He didn't look up from his work. He just nodded once. What happened to her? Marilou asked, her voice quiet. The same thing that was happening to you, he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. I was too young, too slow, too stupid to stop it. By the time I found her. He let the sentence hang in the air, unfinished. The lockets, Marilou whispered. In the basement. Was she one of them? No, Jed said, finally looking at her. His eyes were pits of old grief. Finch passed her on to someone else, someone worse, a man named Blackwood. The name landed like a stone between them. Elias Blackwood, the man from the wanted poster, the reason he'd come to Dry Creek. He's a lawman, Marilou said, confused. Jed gave a bitter laugh. He was. Now he's something else. He deals in land, in guns, in gold. But his real currency is girls. He runs a network from here to the border. Men like Finch are his suppliers. They find the lost ones, the broken ones, the ones no one will miss. Finch was just a gatekeeper. Suddenly it all clicked into place. The fire, the escape. This wasn't just a rescue. He had used her escape as a cover to get to Finch, to find a lead to Blackwood. She felt a flash of anger, of being used all over again. As if reading her mind, Jed put down his gun. I came to Dry Creek for him. I won't lie to you. But when I saw you, when I saw what Finch was doing, it became about you too. He reached into his coat and pulled out the small leather-bound book he'd taken from the chapel. Not the hymnal, the ledger from Finch's safe. This is Finch's account book. It's got names, dates, payments. It's the first real proof I have against Blackwood's whole operation. He tossed the book into her lap. You're not just a girl I saved, Marilou. You're a witness. You're the key. She opened the book. The pages were filled with neat, spidery handwriting. Names she didn't know. Next to each name was a dollar amount. Her own name was there, at the very end. Marilou Tucker. $100. Seeing it in black and white, her own worth priced out like cattle, should have broken her. Instead, a cold, hard anger started to grow in its place, an anger that burned hotter than any fire. She closed the book and looked at Jed, her eyes clear and steady. Marilou is dead, she said. She died in that pantry. Jed raised an eyebrow. From now on, she said, her voice finding a strength she never knew it had. You can call me Clara. He studied her for a long moment. Then a slow smile touched the corner of his mouth. It was the first time she had ever seen him smile. Clara, he repeated. All right, Clara. Get some sleep. Tomorrow, we start your training. Training for what? For the war that's coming, he said, his smile vanishing as quickly as it came. Blackwood knows Finch is gone. He'll know his ledger is missing, and he's going to come looking for it. For us. When he does, you're not going to be a witness. You're going to be a soldier. The storm hit without warning. 1 minute the sky was a clear, brutal blue. The next, it was a bruised purple, and the heavens opened up. The desert didn't rain. It bled. Jed pushed them hard, seeking the shelter of a canyon he knew. They were soaked to the bone in minutes, the wind a physical force trying to tear them from their saddles. Clara clung to her mule, her teeth chattering, the world a blur of rain and lightning. They found the overhang just as the fever took hold of her. She remembered sliding from the mule, Jed catching her, his face a grim mask through the sheets of water. Then, nothing. She woke to the smell of wood smoke and wet wool. She was wrapped in Jed's bedroll, his heavy duster covering her. A small, stubborn fire crackled nearby. He was sitting beside her, pressing a damp cloth to her forehead. You're burning up, he said, his voice rough with worry. I'm cold, she whispered, her body racked with shivers. For 2 days the storm raged outside their small cave, and a different storm raged inside her. The fever was a merciless thief, stealing her strength, filling her head with ghosts. She saw Finch's face in the dancing shadows, heard his voice in the howling wind. Through it all, Jed was a constant presence. He forced bitter willow bark tea between her lips. He held her when the shaking got too bad. He talked to her, his voice a low, steady rumble that kept the ghosts at bay. He told her stories of the trail, of men he'd known, of his sister, Ella. He didn't just nurse her body back to health, he was tending to her soul. On the third morning, the fever broke. She woke up weak and drenched in sweat, but clear-headed. The storm had passed. Sunlight streamed into the cave, and the air smelled clean and new, like the first day of creation. Jed was asleep, slumped against the cave wall, his hat tipped over his face, his pistol resting on his chest. He looked older in his sleep, the lines around his eyes deeper, etched by a pain she was only just beginning to understand. She sat up, the duster falling from her shoulders. She wasn't Marilou anymore. She wasn't even the girl who had named herself Clara. The fever had burned away the last of the fear, the last of the weakness. She knew what she had to do. She stood up on shaky legs and walked to where their saddlebags lay. She found Finch's ledger. She took it, along with Jed's spare revolver and a box of cartridges. She walked to the mouth of the cave and looked out at the washed, clean desert. For the first time, she wasn't running from something. She was walking toward it. "Where are you going?" Jed's voice made her jump. He was awake, watching her, his eyes narrowed. "I can't be your witness," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "I can't be your key. I won't be a piece in your game of revenge, Jedediah." He stood up slowly. "That's not what this is." "Isn't it?" she challenged. "This is about Ella. It's always been about Ella. You're hunting Blackwood to put her ghost to rest." "And what's wrong with that?" he growled. "Nothing," she said softly. "But my ghosts are my own. You saved my life, and I will be grateful until the day I die. But my fight is not your fight." She held up the ledger. "These names, these girls, they're my fight. You can hunt Blackwood for your sister. I'm going to hunt him for them." He stared at her, a strange mix of pride and alarm on his face. "You won't last a day out there alone." "Then teach me," she said, her gaze unflinching. "You promised me a soldier, so train me, not to be your partner, not to be your bait. Train me to be a weapon. Train me to finish what Finch started. When we face Blackwood, I won't be standing behind you. I'll be standing beside you." A long silence stretched between them. The only sound was the drip of water from the rocks. Finally, Jed walked over to her. He didn't take the gun. He didn't take the book. He took her hand, turning it over, his thumb tracing the scars on her knuckles. "All right, soldier," he said, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. "Class is in session." Santa Peña was a secret the desert kept well. It wasn't on any map, a small village of adobe homes tucked into a hidden valley, watered by a spring that never ran dry. It was a place for people who didn't want to be found, a place for ghosts to learn how to live again. Jed and Clara rode in at dusk, two weary travelers who asked for nothing but a roof and some quiet. An old woman with eyes like obsidian, Doña Inez, took them in. She gave them a small casita on the edge of the village, took the coins Jed offered, and told them the rules. "You bring no trouble here. You respect the quiet. You leave your guns and your ghosts at the door." For 6 months they found something that felt dangerously like peace. Jed found work with the ranchers, his skills with horses and fences earning him respect and a steady wage. Clara worked with Doña Inez, learning the secrets of herbs and healing. The women of the village taught her to cook, to weave, to find her own voice. The girl who had been raised in silence began to laugh. The training was relentless. Every morning before sunrise, Jed took her out into the canyons. He taught her how to track, how to move without a sound, how to live off the land. And he taught her the gun. At first, the Colt was heavy and awkward in her hand. Her shots were wild. But she was a patient student. She learned to control her breathing, to squeeze the trigger, not pull it. The fear she'd once felt at the sound of a gunshot was replaced by a cold, focused calm. She was no longer afraid of the weapon. She had become one. In the evenings, they would sit by their small fire and study Finch's ledger. They memorized the names, the towns, the dates. It was a map of Blackwood's web. Clara began to see patterns, roots, connections. She had a sharp mind, and for the first time in her life, she had a purpose to fuel it. The bond between them deepened, forged in the heat of the desert sun and the shared silence of their pasts. It wasn't love, not in the way the songs and stories told it. It was something quieter, fiercer, a loyalty that ran deeper than blood. But the past is a patient hunter. One afternoon, two riders came into Santa Peña. They weren't ranchers. They were gringos with hard eyes and tied-down holsters. They started asking questions in the cantina. Questions about an outlaw named Cain and a runaway girl. Doña Inez sent a young boy to fetch Jed from the fields. By the time he got back to the casita, the bounty hunters were already walking across the plaza toward them. "Jedediah Cain," the leader said, a greasy smile on his face. "Got a price on your head, son. And the girl. Seems the good folks of Dry Creek want her back. Says she's a thief." Jed didn't move. He just stood there, his hand resting casually on his hip. "You need to leave," he said, his voice calm. "I don't think so," the man sneered, his hand dropping to his gun. He never cleared the leather. A single shot cracked the afternoon quiet. The bounty hunter staggered back, a look of pure shock on his face, a red flower blooming on his chest. He collapsed into the dust. His partner stared, frozen. Not at Jed, but at Clara. She stood on the porch of the casita, Jed's spare revolver in her hand, smoke curling from the barrel. Her face was pale, but her hand was steady as rock. The second bounty hunter, suddenly realizing he was outmatched and outgunned, threw his hands in the air. "We don't want no trouble." "Then you picked the wrong town," Clara said, her voice cold as a grave. "Get on your horse, ride out, and tell whoever sent you that the ghosts in Santa Peña bite back." The man scrambled onto his horse and galloped away as if the devil himself were on his heels. Jed turned to look at Clara. The shock on his face was slowly replaced by a look of profound respect. The girl he had rescued from the pantry was gone forever. In her place stood a woman he was beginning to realize might be even more dangerous than he was. The quiet was broken. They knew their peace had been bought on borrowed time, and the bill was about to come due. That night, Jed laid a map on their small table. "It's time," he said. "We can't wait for Blackwood to come to us. We have to take the fight to him." He pointed to a spot on the map, a mining town on the border called Redemption. "According to Finch's ledger, this is his main hub. If we can cut the head off the snake here, the rest of his network will fall." Clara looked at the map, then at Jed. We, he confirmed. "I'm not leaving you behind, and I'm not fighting this without you." It wasn't a question, it was a fact. They were in this together until the end. She nodded, a slow, determined fire building in her eyes. "All right," she said. "Let's go to church." The town of Redemption was the Devil's Church, and Elias Blackwood was its high priest. It was a town built on greed and desperation, clinging to the side of a mountain that had been bled dry of its silver. The law here was whatever the man with the most guns said it was. And that man was Blackwood. He didn't wear a badge anymore. He wore tailored suits and a smile that never reached his cold, dead eyes. He owned the mine, the saloon, the hotel, and every soul in town. From here, he ran his empire of flesh and fear. Jed and Clara rode in not as gunslingers, but as pilgrims. They sold their horses, dressed in miners' rags, and blended into the desperate crowds that choked the muddy streets. They were just two more faces, hungry and forgotten. They spent a week watching, learning the town's rhythms. They identified Blackwood's lieutenants, the routes his men used, the location of his office above the saloon. Clara's sharp eyes missed nothing. She sketched maps in a small journal, noted patrol times, identified weak spots. The plan was simple and insane. Blackwood kept his master ledger, the book that detailed every transaction, every girl, every bribe, in a large safe in his office. Getting to it was impossible. But Jed knew Blackwood had one weakness: pride. Once a month, Blackwood hosted a high-stakes poker game in the saloon's back room. It was an invitation-only affair for the richest and most corrupt men in the territory. During the game, he would often have the safe brought into the room, a boastful display of his wealth and power. "That's our window," Jed said, as they huddled in their small rented room. "He'll be distracted. His best men will be in that room with him. The rest of the town will be focused on the party." "How do we get in?" Clara asked. "We don't," Jed said, a grim look on his face. "You do?" The night of the poker game, the saloon was a riot of noise and light. Clara walked through the front doors, and every head turned. She was no longer the grimy miner's girl. She wore a deep red dress, bought with the last of their money. Her hair was piled high, and her eyes, once hollow with fear, were now bright and dangerous. She looked like an avenging angel walking into a den of thieves. She walked straight to the bar and ordered a whiskey. One of Blackwood's men, a hulking brute named Larson, swaggered over. "You look lost, little lady." Clara turned and gave him a slow smile. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." She leaned in and whispered something in his ear. Larson's eyes widened. He nodded and led her toward the back room. Jed watched from the shadows of an alley across the street, his heart a cold knot in his stomach. Everything depended on her now. Inside the back room, the air was thick with cigar smoke and tension. Elias Blackwood sat at the head of the table, a king on his throne. The massive iron safe stood behind him. Larson leaned down and whispered to his boss. Blackwood looked up, his eyes falling on Clara as she stood in the doorway. He smirked. "Well, well, what have we here?" "I have a message for you," Clara said, her voice clear and carrying over the clink of poker chips. "From Jedediah Kane." The room went silent. Blackwood's smile vanished. "Where is he?" "He sent me to make you an offer," Clara said, walking slowly toward the table. "He has Finch's ledger. He's willing to trade it. For her." She slid a small, worn tin locket across the table. Blackwood picked it up. He opened it. Inside was a lock of blonde hair. His face went pale. "Ella." "He knows everything, Blackwood," Clara said, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "He knows what you did to her. He knows about all of them. Give him the master ledger, and he'll let you live. Refuse, and he'll burn your whole world to the ground." Blackwood stared at the locket, then at her. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. "It's a touching story, but you made one mistake, little girl." He snapped his fingers. Two of his men grabbed Clara's arms, twisting them behind her back. "You came alone," Blackwood finished, rising from his chair. Did I? Clara asked, her eyes flicking toward the window behind him. At that exact moment, the window exploded inward as Jedediah Kane crashed through, guns blazing. The room erupted into chaos. Men screamed, diving for cover. Gunshots echoed in the enclosed space. Jed moved with a deadly grace, a whirlwind of smoke and fury. But Blackwood wasn't a fool. He used the chaos to his advantage, grabbing Clara and using her as a shield, pressing a pistol to her head. "Drop it, Kane," he roared, "or she dies." Jed froze, his guns leveled. The two men stared at each other over the sea of overturned tables and dead bodies. The hunter and his prey, finally face to face. "It's over, Blackwood," Jed snarled. "It's just getting started," Blackwood retorted, his eyes wild. He started backing toward the safe. "You want the book? You'll have to come through her." But he had miscalculated. He thought Clara was a victim, a shield. He didn't know she was a weapon. With a speed that defied belief, Clara stomped down hard on Blackwood's instep with her heel. He grunted in pain, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. It was all she needed. She slammed her head back into his nose, the crunch of cartilage sickeningly loud. He staggered back, momentarily stunned, his gun wavering. It was the only opening Jed needed. One shot, clean and true. Elias Blackwood collapsed to the floor, his reign of terror ending not with a bang, but with a choked gasp. Silence descended on the room. Jed rushed to Clara's side. "Are you all right?" She nodded, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She looked down at Blackwood's body, then at the safe. "It's not over yet." Together, they opened the safe. And there it was, the master ledger, page after page of names, an encyclopedia of pain. They didn't burn it. They took it. They rode out of redemption as the sun came up, leaving the town to wake up and find its king dead. They delivered the ledger to the one honest territorial judge Jed knew, a man who owed him his life. The network crumbled. Men were arrested. Secrets were brought into the light. It wasn't a perfect justice, but it was a start. Weeks later, Jed and Clara stood on a ridge overlooking a quiet valley. The past was finally behind them. The ghosts were finally quiet. "What now?" Clara asked. Jed looked at her, not at the girl he'd saved, but at the woman who had saved him right back. He reached out and tucked a stray piece of hair behind her ear. "Now," he said softly, "we live. Some stories end in bloodshed and revenge, but the best ones, the ones that last, they end in redemption. Not the name of a town, but the quiet peace of two souls who walked through fire and came out the other side, finally free. If you enjoyed this story, and you believe that even in the darkest of places, a single light can make all the difference, then don't forget to like and subscribe, because there are always more stories out there waiting to be told.